When Trump publicly pressures Zelensky to accept territorial losses while Putin continues bombing Ukrainian cities, we're not witnessing the art of the deal. We're witnessing the art of pressuring the party that can't walk away. Welcome to Generations in Power. I'm Jalen Brooks.
And I'm Arthur Caldwell. What we just heard from President Zelensky on Ben Shapiro Show reveals the uncomfortable truth about America's declining leverage in a world where our adversaries increasingly call our bluff.
Let's jump straight into this, Arthur. Trump posted on Truth Social calling Zelensky's stance on Crimea harmful to peace negotiations, while Russian missiles were literally falling on Kyiv. What kind of peace process has one side dodging bombs while the other faces zero consequences?
Look, Jalen, this is what pragmatic realism looks like in a no-win situation. Trump's approach simply acknowledges the ground truth. Ukraine cannot militarily reclaim its territory without Western backing, and we're unwilling to provide unlimited support. It's a harsh reality, but sometimes adults have to make difficult choices.
Adults making difficult choices? That's the euphemism we're using for telling a country that's been invaded to just accept partial annexation while their civilians are being killed? Arthur, this isn't realism. It's what I call surrender point diplomacy, where we only apply pressure to the party that actually values our relationship.
The fundamental misunderstanding of your generation, Jalen, is believing American power is unlimited. We cannot force Putin to do anything. He controls a nuclear arsenal, has alternative trade relationships with China, and frankly, doesn't care what we think. This isn't a Marvel movie where the good guys always win.
But here's where I'll surprise you. This might not be about Trump at all. What if this is about structural decline in American power rather than personal failing? When J.D. Vance says it's time for them to either say yes or for the United States to walk away, they're telegraphing something profound. America can no longer meaningfully pressure adversaries.
Now, that's an astute observation. When Zelensky told Shapiro that United States shouldn't be searching for the balance in these words between Russia and Ukraine, he's articulating a desperate plea for moral clarity that we can no longer back with action.
What we're witnessing is the compliant partner paradox. The nations most aligned with American interests bear the greatest burden of compromise, while adversaries face fewer consequences for intransigence. It's why we pressure Ukraine, Taiwan, and Israel more than Russia, China, or Iran.
That's remarkably incisive, Jalen. But let's not discount Trump's unique approach here. His declaration that the man with no cards to play should now finally get it done, while referring to Zelensky, reflects his transactional worldview. Strength determines negotiating position, not moral standing.
Yet Zelensky made an incredible point in that interview. He said America actually got tremendous value from this war. We acquired battlefield intelligence on our weapon systems, learned Russian military capabilities, and tested our defense technologies without sacrificing American lives. That's a point neither Trump nor Biden have ever effectively communicated.
It raises the question of whether either administration has been honest about America's strategic interests here. Look at historical parallels. During the Cold War, we frequently pressured allies to accommodate Soviet interests to avoid direct confrontation. Kennedy secretly removed Jupiter missiles from Turkey after the Cuban Missile Crisis, but presented it publicly as a Soviet capitulation.
But there's something particularly jarring about Trump's approach. Did you catch how in his Truth Social post he said, "I have nothing to do with Russia, but have much to do with wanting to save, on average, 5,000 Russian and Ukrainian soldiers a week who are dying." He's positioning himself as a humanitarian while simultaneously telling Ukraine to surrender territory, what I call compassionate capitulation.
I'm actually troubled by something more fundamental here. When Trump states, the situation for Ukraine is dire, we can have peace or he can fight for another 3 years before losing the whole country, he's creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. By publicly undermining Ukrainian resolve, he strengthens Putin's negotiating position.
Wait, Arthur Caldwell criticizing Trump's negotiation tactics? Someone check if hell just froze over.
Even this old warhorse can recognize dangerous precedents, Jalen. Rewarding territorial aggression creates incentives for more of the same. It's why the post-Wabitui order explicitly rejected the legitimacy of conquest. But here's the deeper question. Does America still have the economic and military dominance to enforce those norms?
That's the trillion-dollar question. And here's my uncomfortable truth. I'm not convinced any president, Democrat or Republican, could effectively pressure Russia in today's geopolitical landscape. We've entered what I'm calling the multipolar reality gap. Our rhetoric still assumes unipolar American dominance, while our actions betray recognition of our limitations.
Consider this staggering disconnect. Zelensky tells Shapiro they've accepted an unconditional 30-day ceasefire. Trump demands concessions. Meanwhile, as Shapiro points out, Putin has agreed to nothing while bombs continue falling. That's not a peace process. It's a diplomatic charade masking unilateral pressure.
And what's most revealing is that Trump's criticism targets Zelensky, not Putin. When's the last time you saw Trump post about Putin's intransigence? The asymmetry tells us everything about where leverage exists and where it doesn't.
You know, in my 40 years navigating Washington's corridors of power, I've seen this pattern repeat across administrations. Carter pressured Israel at Camp David more than Egypt. Clinton pushed Kosovo toward concessions more than Serbia. Obama demanded more from Ukraine than Russia in 2014. It's what I call path of least resistance diplomacy.
And it's not just foreign policy, it's a fundamental power dynamic. Systems exert pressure where they get results. Ukraine responds to American pressure because they need us. Russia doesn't because they've insulated themselves from our leverage. It's like disciplining the good kid in class while the troublemaker runs wild.
The disturbing implication is that American friendship might be a strategic liability in negotiations. Consider Zelensky's point about dignity to Shapiro. Everything that is related to Ukraine's dignity, I will always please defend it. This is my job. What if dignity is the one card he actually still holds?
That's precisely it. When Trump says the man with no cards to play should finally get it done, he fundamentally misunderstands what's at stake for Ukraine. Territorial integrity isn't just about land, it's about national survival. Let me put this in terms Americans might understand. Imagine if after Pearl Harbor, Britain had suggested we accept Japanese control of Hawaii to achieve peace.
You know, Jalen, what if we're looking at this all wrong? What if this isn't about Ukraine at all, but about American domestic politics? Trump promised to end this war. His base wants America to focus inward. Maybe Ukrainian interests are being sacrificed at the altar of campaign promises.
Arthur Caldwell suggesting a Republican president might be prioritizing polling over principle? Now I've heard everything.
Even dinosaurs evolve, Jalen. But there's a deeper pattern across administrations I find disturbing. We demand democracy for ourselves, but increasingly accept its absence elsewhere for stability. It's selective standard syndrome. Our principles seem to apply in inverse proportion to the difficulty of enforcing them.
That brings us to the most chilling part of Zelensky's interview. He told Shapiro, "We are kind of a living shield. So as long as Russians are not in any single NATO member nation, your families are not facing this question. Whether to send their son or daughter, whether they will return home alive or wounded."
The uncomfortable truth is that American policy has made a calculation. Ukrainian lives are acceptable casualties if they prevent American ones. It's not new. We made similar calculations in Korea, Vietnam, and countless proxy conflicts. What's new is our diminished capacity to actually influence outcomes.
And that's the heart of what I'm calling the asymmetrical peace paradox. We pressure those who share our values because they're the only ones who still listen to us. It's not Trump's personal failing, it's America's structural reality. We're a fading hegemon whose threats increasingly ring hollow.
When history looks back on this period, I suspect they won't focus on partisan divisions or individual presidents. They'll see a superpower in decline, unable to enforce the rules-based order it created, increasingly resorting to pressuring friends because its enemies no longer feared it.
That's a hell of a depressing note to end on, Arthur. But maybe recognizing our limitations is the first step toward developing more effective strategies. If we can't be the world's sole enforcer anymore, perhaps we need to build genuine coalitions rather than going it alone.
Maybe that's the silver lining in this dark cloud, Jalen. Imperial decline forces adaptation. Whatever comes next in American foreign policy, it can't be premised on the fiction of unlimited power. For Generations in Power, I'm Arthur Caldwell.
And I'm Jalen Brooks. Peace.